As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over Maplewood, Clara Hayes stood on the threshold of the Watts family's dilapidated mansion, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. The mansion, once a beacon of wealth and prosperity, now appeared like a haunting reminder of the tragedy that had befallen the Watts family. The children, Emily, Jacob, and Sarah, had vanished without a trace, their disappearance as mysterious as their parents' deaths. The townsfolk whispered about the ghosts that roamed the halls, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the task ahead. She had spent the past week meticulously examining every inch of the Watts' lives, searching for any sign that might have predicted such a tragedy. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that the Watts' seemingly perfect life was a facade, shrouded in secrets and deception. The once tranquil town of Maplewood was now a sea of unease, with everyone looking over their shoulders, wondering when the next blow would strike. The Watts family murders were not just a local tragedy. They were a wake-up call to the hidden darkness that could lurk even in the most seemingly idyllic communities. Clara had learned that the Watts family had been under scrutiny for years, with whispers of financial troubles and marital strife echoing through the town. But it wasn't until the bodies of David and Patricia Watts were discovered in their home, along with the eerie silence of their missing children, that the full extent of the horror became apparent. Clara's investigation had revealed that the Watts family had been living a double life, with their true nature hidden from the world. The mansion, once a symbol of their success, had become a place of darkness, where the line between reality and illusion blurred. She had spent countless hours poring over financial records, searching for any anomalies that might have indicated the family's true state of affairs. The evidence pointed to a web of deceit, with the Wattses manipulating their finances and their lives to maintain the appearance of normalcy. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more sinister at play, something that went beyond mere financial troubles. Her investigation had led her to the town's most reclusive resident, a man named Edward Blackwood, who had been seen lurking near the Watts mansion on several occasions. Blackwood, a former psychologist, had been estranged from the community for years, his name synonymous with the dark side of Maplewood's past. Clara knew that she needed to confront him, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was a key to unlocking the mystery of the Watts family's downfall. As she approached the mansion, Clara could hear the faint sound of laughter echoing through the house, a sound that seemed out of place and unsettling. She took a step back, her eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of the noise. It was then that she noticed the faint glow of a light emanating from the basement, a place that had been sealed off since the deaths of the Wattses. Determined to uncover the truth, Clara descended the creaking stairs, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the walls were adorned with faded portraits of the Watts family, their smiles frozen in time. She reached the basement door, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. She turned the handle, and the door creaked open, revealing a room that seemed to be frozen in time. The room was filled with old photographs, letters, and mementos, all of which told a story of love, loss, and deception. Clara's eyes scanned the room, searching for any clue that might lead her to the truth. It was then that she noticed a small, locked box sitting on a shelf, its surface covered in dust and cobwebs. She reached for the box, her fingers trembling as she turned the key, and with a click, the box opened, revealing a collection of letters addressed to her. The letters were written by the Watts children, detailing their experiences of living in the mansion and their fears of what lay beyond its walls. Clara read the letters, her heart sinking as she learned of the children's nightmarish existence, where they were forced to watch their parents descend into madness and deceit. The children had been locked away, their voices silenced, their suffering hidden from the world. As Clara read the final letter, she felt a chill run down her spine. The letter revealed that the children had discovered a secret room beneath the mansion, a place where their parents had been conducting unspeakable experiments. Clara knew that she had to find this room, to uncover the truth that had been hidden for so long. With renewed determination, Clara began searching the mansion, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. She found the hidden door behind a bookshelf, its hinges rusted and silent. She pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase that led to an even darker place. As she descended the stairs, she could hear the faint sound of whispers, a sound that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. At the bottom of the stairs, Clara found the secret room, its walls lined with equipment and strange chemicals. The room was filled with the smell of decay and death, a testament to the horrors that had taken place here. In the center of the room, she found a table covered in papers, and on the papers she saw sketches of the children, their faces twisted in terror. Clara's heart broke as she realized the extent of the horror that had been unleashed upon the Watts children. She knew that she had to bring their story to light, to expose the darkness that had been hidden beneath the surface of Maplewood. She gathered the evidence, her hands trembling with emotion, and made her way back to the surface. As she left the mansion, Clara could hear the townsfolk whispering about the ghost that had been seen lurking in the shadows. She knew that her investigation was far from over, but she also knew that she had uncovered a truth that could change everything. The Watts family murders were not just a local tragedy. They were a wake-up call to the hidden darkness that could lurk even in the most seemingly idyllic communities. As Clara Hayes continued her relentless pursuit of the truth, she knew that the answers she sought could be the key to unlocking the door to a horror far worse than anyone could have imagined. The town of Maplewood would never be the same, and Clara was determined to bring justice to the Watts family, no matter the cost. The Watts family murders had cast a long, ominous shadow over the once tranquil town of Maplewood. As the days turned into weeks, the absence of the children, Emily, Jacob, and Sarah, became a haunting specter that refused to be banished. The parents had been found dead in their home, victims of a brutal crime that left the town reeling. Their eyes darting nervously between one another, the family had been a picture of domestic bliss, a beacon of normalcy in an otherwise ordinary neighborhood. Now, however, their deaths and the children's disappearances were unraveling the tapestry of Maplewood's seemingly perfect facade, revealing a tapestry of secrets and deceit. Clara Hayes, a seasoned detective with the Maplewood Police Department, had taken the lead on the case. Her team, a dedicated group of officers with a mix of experience and fresh enthusiasm, had been working tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. They had combed through the Watts home, looking for any sign of the children or evidence that might point to their whereabouts. They had interviewed neighbors, friends, and relatives, searching for someone who might have seen something unusual or remembered a detail that seemed out of place. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that the Watts' life was a facade, a meticulously constructed illusion that concealed a world of its own. As the investigation deepened, Clara Hayes and her team found themselves delving into the lives of the Watts family, uncovering a web of lies and manipulation. They discovered that the parents had been hiding their true natures. Their marriage was a sham, and their children were the sole reason they had continued to pretend. It was a chilling revelation that shattered the illusion of normalcy that the Watts family had presented to the world. The children, it seemed, were the only thing keeping the parents' act together, and now that they were gone, the facade had crumbled. The town of Maplewood was now a sea of unease, with everyone looking over their shoulders, wondering when the next blow would strike. The Watts family murders had become a local tragedy, a stark reminder that even in the most seemingly idyllic communities, darkness could lurk. Clara Hayes knew that her investigation was not just about finding the children or bringing their parents' killers to justice. It was about exposing the hidden darkness that could lurk even in the most unsuspecting places. As Clara Hayes continued her relentless pursuit of the truth, she couldn't shake the feeling that the answers she sought could be the key to unlocking a door to a horror far worse than anyone could have imagined. She had seen too many cases where the truth was a twisted thing, and she was determined not to let the Watts family's tragedy be just another unsolved mystery. She knew that the children's disappearances were not the end of the story. They were a starting point, a gateway to a realm of darkness that no one had dared to explore. The team worked around the clock, following every lead, examining every piece of evidence, and piecing together the scattered fragments of the Watts family's life. They discovered that the children had been in contact with a mysterious online persona, someone they had met through a secret chat room. The chat room was filled with other children who shared their deepest secrets and darkest fears, a place where they felt safe to express themselves without judgment. But the chat room had been infiltrated by someone sinister, someone who knew too much about the Watts family and their secret lives. Clara Hayes and her team traced the online conversations back to an IP address in a foreign country, leading them to believe that the children's disappearance was not a local crime, but an international one. The team worked tirelessly to gather intelligence, using their connections and resources to track down the individual behind the online persona. They discovered that this person had been monitoring the Watts family for years, their obsession with the family's secrets bordering on the pathological. It was a chilling realization that the children's disappearance was no accident. It was a calculated move, a prelude to a much larger, more sinister plan. As the investigation continued, Clara Hayes found herself confronting her own fears and insecurities. She had seen the darkest side of human nature before, but the Watts family case was pushing her to her limits. She knew that the answers she sought could be the key to unlocking a door to a horror far worse than anyone could have imagined, and she was determined to face that horror head-on. She called in a specialist from the FBI, an expert in cybercrime and online predators, to help them crack the case. Together, they delved deeper into the chat room, uncovering a network of pedophiles and predators who had been using the platform to prey on vulnerable children. They discovered that the Watts family's children had been targeted specifically, their disappearances part of a larger scheme to kidnap and exploit them. The children, it seemed, were just the beginning, and the predators were planning something far more sinister. As the team worked to track down the predators and rescue the children, Clara Hayes found herself facing a moral dilemma. She knew that the predators were guilty of heinous crimes, but she also understood the importance of justice and the rights of the victims. She struggled with the idea of using force to rescue the children, knowing that it could lead to more harm than good. But as the clock ticked down, she knew that she had to make a decision, and she decided that the children's safety was paramount. With the FBI's help, Clara Hayes and her team devised a plan to rescue the children without alerting the predators. They used sophisticated technology to infiltrate the chat room, posing as other children and gaining the trust of the predators. They gathered enough evidence to identify the predators and their locations, and then they set out to rescue the children. The operation was a success, with the children being safely returned to their parents. The predators were arrested and charged with numerous crimes, their dark secrets exposed for all to see. The Watts family murders had been solved, but the impact of the case had far-reaching consequences. The town of Maplewood had been forever changed, and Clara Hayes had become a hero to many, her determination and courage inspiring a community that had been shattered by tragedy. As the dust settled, Clara Hayes reflected on the case that had consumed her life for so long. She knew that the answers she had sought had not only exposed the hidden darkness in Maplewood, but also brought justice to the Watts family. But she also knew that the battle against darkness was an ongoing one, and that she would have to continue to fight, to protect those who could not protect themselves. The Watts family murders had been a wake-up call, a reminder that the world was a dangerous place, and that everyone had a role to play in keeping it safe. And as Clara Hayes stood amidst the ruins of the Watts family's once perfect life, she vowed to continue her pursuit of the truth, no matter the cost. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the once peaceful streets of Maplewood, Clara Hayes stood at the threshold of the Watts family home, her heart pounding in rhythm with the palpable tension that hung heavy in the air. The town's silence was broken only by the occasional creak of an old window or the distant honking of a car, as if nature itself was holding its breath. The home was now a crime scene, a stark contrast to the cheerful facade it had presented to the world. Inside, Clara's team had spent hours meticulously searching every nook and cranny, uncovering evidence that suggested the Watts family's lives were anything but perfect. Photographs of smiling children, a seemingly happy family, were juxtaposed with receipts for late-night deliveries and letters from anonymous sources warning of impending doom. The children, Emily, Jacob, and Sarah, had vanished without a trace, their disappearance as mysterious as their parents' deaths. As Clara stood there, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the precipice of a much deeper, darker truth. She turned to Detective Markson, his face etched with concern. "Do you think it's possible that the kids are still alive?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara sighed, her eyes reflecting the uncertainty that plagued her thoughts. "I don't know, Markson, but I refuse to give up hope until we have exhausted every possible lead. The kids might not be safe, but we can't afford to let them be forgotten." She glanced around the room, taking in the scattered evidence that seemed to cry out for answers. A broken piece of a puzzle lay on the floor, half of it still attached to a picture frame that had been torn from the wall. The other half was missing, a symbol of the shattered lives that lay before them. Clara reached down and picked it up, examining the intricate design that had once been part of a beautiful scene. "Look at this," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "It's like the kids left us a clue. Maybe they knew what was coming and tried to warn us." Markson nodded, his eyes narrowing as he considered her words. "But how, and where are they now?" Clara's mind raced as she tried to piece together the puzzle. The anonymous letters, the late-night deliveries, the children's sudden disappearance. It all seemed to point to someone or something sinister lurking in the shadows of Maplewood. But who and what was it? As she stood there, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car approaching. She turned to see a sleek black SUV pull up in front of the house. The door opened, and out stepped a tall, imposing figure in a dark suit, his face obscured by the shadows of a wide-brimmed hat. "Clara Hayes," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I've been expecting you." Clara's heart skipped a beat as she realized she was facing a stranger, but one who seemed to know more about the Watts family than anyone else. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. The man stepped forward, his eyes meeting hers with a cold, calculating gaze. "I'm a friend," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Or perhaps I should say a benefactor. I've been watching Maplewood, and I've taken an interest in the Watts family." Clara's mind raced as she tried to process the man's words. A benefactor, but why would he be interested in the Watts family? And why was he here now? "Tell me why you're here," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "And what do you want with us?" The man's smile widened, revealing a set of sharp, white teeth. "I want to help you, Clara Hayes," he said. "But first, you need to understand the truth about the Watts family and the secrets they've been keeping. And once you do, you might not want to help us anymore." Clara's heart raced as she realized that she was on the brink of discovering something far more terrifying than she had ever imagined. The Watts family murders were not just a local tragedy. They were a wake-up call to the hidden darkness that could lurk even in the most seemingly idyllic communities. And as Clara Hayes continued her relentless pursuit of the truth, she knew that the answers she sought could be the key to unlocking the door to a horror far worse than anyone could have imagined. The Watts family had always been the picture of domestic bliss in Maplewood, a tight-knit community where the neighbors knew each other's secrets and shared the trivial joys and sorrows of life. But as the days passed and the children, Emily, Jacob, and Sarah, went missing, the once serene atmosphere was shattered. Their parents had been found dead under mysterious circumstances, their bodies showing no signs of struggle, which only added to the air of unease that now hung over the town like a heavy shroud. Clara Hayes, a seasoned detective with the local police department, had been assigned to lead the investigation, and she was determined to uncover the truth. Clara's team, a diverse group of seasoned officers, had been working tirelessly, combing through every lead and following every thread of information. They had spoken to neighbors, friends, and coworkers of the Watts family, all of whom had expressed shock and disbelief at the sudden tragedy. The children's disappearances were even more baffling. There had been no signs of a struggle, no ransom demands, nothing to indicate that they had been taken against their will. The families and friends of the Watts children were frantic, their worst fears slowly coming to fruition as days turned into weeks without any news. Clara Hayes had taken it upon herself to dig deeper, understanding that the children's disappearances were inextricably linked to their parents' deaths. She had spent countless hours in the Watts home, examining every detail, looking for something, anything, that might have been overlooked. The home had been meticulously kept, the living room filled with family photos, each one a smiling face that now brought a sense of pain and sorrow. Clara had also spoken to the children's teachers and counselors, hoping to find someone who might have seen something unusual or heard something that didn't sit quite right. As the investigation unfolded, Clara began to notice patterns, oddities that seemed to point toward something sinister lurking in the shadows. The Watts family had a history of financial troubles, though they had managed to maintain the appearance of affluence. Clara had discovered that their debts were far greater than they had ever let on, and that the family had been living beyond their means. This revelation only added to the sense of unease that now gripped the community. One evening, Clara received a call from an anonymous source. The caller had mentioned a secret meeting that had taken place in the woods behind the Watts home just days before the murders. This was a crucial lead, and Clara knew she had to follow it up. She led her team to the site, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched for any evidence that might have been left behind. In the underbrush, they found a small, weathered box, its contents scattered about. Inside, they discovered photographs, receipts, and other personal documents that belonged to the Watts family, but there was nothing that directly linked them to the children's disappearance. Determined not to give up, Clara continued her search, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of disturbance. It was during this meticulous search that she stumbled upon something that made her heart race. Buried beneath a thick layer of leaves and dirt was a small, weathered key. Her fingers trembling, she picked it up and examined it closely. The key had a peculiar symbol etched into its head, a symbol that Clara had seen before, on the cover of a mysterious book that had been found in the Watts home. The book, titled The Secret of the Hidden Ones, was filled with cryptic symbols and strange rituals that seemed to hint at a dark, arcane practice. Clara's mind raced as she pieced together the puzzle. The key, the book, the secret meeting, the pieces were finally coming together. She knew that the Watts family had been involved in something dangerous, something that had led to their deaths and the disappearances of their children. With renewed determination, Clara turned her focus to the town of Maplewood, looking for others who might have been involved in this clandestine group. She knew that the truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and that the answers she sought could be the key to finding the missing children. Her search led her to a small, secluded cabin at the edge of Maplewood, a place that seemed out of place in the otherwise tranquil town. Clara and her team arrived just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Inside the cabin, they found evidence that confirmed their worst fears. The room was filled with ancient texts, ritualistic tools, and strange symbols etched into the walls. They also discovered the remains of the Watts children, their bodies showing signs of abuse and sacrifice. As Clara stood in the cabin, her heart heavy with the weight of the truth, she realized that the Watts family murders were not just a local tragedy. They were a wake-up call to the hidden darkness that could lurk even in the most seemingly idyllic communities. The members of the clandestine group had been recruiting children, using them in rituals designed to strengthen their powers and feed their dark desires. The Watts family had been unsuspecting victims, caught in a web of deceit and horror. Clara Hayes knew that her investigation had only just begun. She had to bring the remaining members of the group to justice, protect the children who were still missing, and expose the darkness that had taken hold in Maplewood. With a deep breath, she stepped outside, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. The town of Maplewood had been forever changed, but Clara Hayes was determined to bring some semblance of peace to those who had suffered. As she walked away from the cabin, she knew that the path ahead would be fraught with peril, but she was ready to face whatever lay in wait, driven by the knowledge that the answers she sought could be the key to unlocking the door to a horror far worse than anyone could have imagined. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the quaint streets of Maplewood, Clara Hayes stood in the Watts' dilapidated backyard, her flashlight cutting through the darkness like a beacon. The investigation had led her here, to this forsaken place where the once vibrant family had met their grim fate. The children's bicycles, rusted and forgotten, lay scattered amidst broken branches and debris, a stark reminder of the innocence that had been cruelly snatched away. She turned her gaze to the remnants of a makeshift shed, its door swinging loosely in the cold breeze, and her heart raced as she recalled the whispers she had heard from the townsfolk. A shed filled with dark secrets and hidden pain. The more Clara pored over the Watts family's past, the clearer it became that they were pawns in a much larger game, a game that seemed to be orchestrated by someone who knew them all too well. The children's schoolwork, riddled with cryptic symbols and codes, suggested that they had been groomed for a purpose, perhaps even a destiny. But whose destiny? And what role did the adults in their lives play in shaping it? She revisited the home, a place once filled with laughter and warmth, now a mausoleum to a family's shattered dreams. Photographs lined the walls, smiling faces of a family united in happiness, yet the truth was a far cry from this idealized image. Clara's team had found letters, hidden beneath floorboards and inside drawers, letters that spoke of betrayal, fear, and a desperate struggle for survival. The Watts' perfect facade was crumbling, and with each revelation, the chilling truth about their lives began to take shape. Maplewood's townsfolk, once bound by the unspoken bonds of community, were now fractured, their trust shattered. Clara's presence had become a constant source of tension, with some residents supporting her quest for justice and others suspiciously whispering about her intentions. The mayor, a man whose career had been built on the foundation of Maplewood's reputation, was especially wary, his eyes darkening whenever Clara's name was mentioned. Clara had uncovered a network of people, some connected by blood and others by the deepest of secrets, all seemingly leading back to the Watts family. Each member of this network was a piece of a much larger puzzle, and Clara knew that to solve the mystery, she would need to uncover every connection, no matter how tenuous or terrifying. She visited old friends, distant relatives, and even strangers, her determination unwavering as she followed the breadcrumbs laid out by the evidence. One evening, as she sat in a dimly lit room of a rundown diner, a place where secrets were traded for the price of a meal, Clara received an unexpected visit. An old man with eyes that held the weight of countless unsaid stories approached her table and handed her a weathered envelope. "For you, Miss Hayes," he said in a voice that was barely a whisper. Inside, she found a photograph, one she had never seen before. In it, the Watts family was gathered, standing before a peculiar structure that looked like an old church, its doors half open and windows blacked out. Clara's heart raced as she pieced together the implications of this new discovery. The Watts family, she realized, had been involved in something far more sinister than she had ever imagined. They were part of a cult that worshipped darkness and sought to manipulate the very fabric of reality. And their children, poor Emily, Jacob, and Sarah, were the next generation, destined to continue the family legacy, whether they knew it or not. The town of Maplewood, once a place of comfort and security, was now a battleground, with Clara Hayes standing alone in her quest for the truth. As the night deepened and the shadows grew longer, she knew that the answers she sought could be the key to unlocking the door to a horror far worse than anyone could have imagined. With a resolve as ironclad as the chain that once locked the children's bicycles, she prepared to face the darkness that had infiltrated the very core of her community, determined to bring justice to the Watts family and to the innocent lives that had been stolen from them. The Watts family murders had cast a long shadow over Maplewood, a once peaceful town nestled in the embrace of rolling hills and whispering woods. The night of the tragedy, the community had been as tranquil as it had been for generations, a quaint little bubble untouched by the chaos of the outside world. But that bubble had burst, and with it, the lives of the Watts family, whose laughter and daily routines had been the soundtrack to Maplewood's existence. Now, the town was a labyrinth of whispers and speculation, the air thick with the scent of fear and the taste of dread. Clara Hayes, a seasoned detective with a reputation for her unyielding determination, had arrived in Maplewood with a team of seasoned officers, their faces etched with concern and resolve. The children, Emily, Jacob, and Sarah, had vanished without a trace, their disappearances as enigmatic as their parents' deaths. The parents, David and Jane Watts, had been found dead in their home, the cause of death a mystery wrapped in a shroud of silence. The children's disappearance, however, was the linchpin of the investigation, and Clara was determined to unravel the threads that led to their fate. As the investigation deepened, Clara and her team delved deeper into the lives of the Watts family, searching for any sign that might have predicted such a tragedy. They combed through the family's home, uncovering a trove of secrets and deception that had been hidden in plain sight. The once perfect facade of the Watts' life was revealed to be a meticulously constructed illusion, one that had been maintained for years. Clara's team found hidden compartments in the walls, love letters that spoke of a marriage on the brink of collapse, and a series of photographs that hinted at a life that was anything but idyllic. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that the Watts' seemingly perfect life was a facade, shrouded in secrets and deception. The children, once the pride of Maplewood, had been caught in the crossfire of their parents' unraveling marriage. Clara's heart ached for the children, whose laughter had been the sweetest melody in Maplewood's otherwise quiet streets. But as she delved deeper, she discovered that the children's disappearances were not the result of a family feud or a tragic accident. They were the result of something far more sinister, something that had been brewing beneath the surface of Maplewood's tranquil exterior. The once tranquil town of Maplewood was now a sea of unease, with everyone looking over their shoulders, wondering when the next blow would strike. The Watts family murders were not just a local tragedy. They were a wake-up call to the hidden darkness that could lurk even in the most seemingly idyllic communities. The town's residents, once bound by the bonds of familiarity and camaraderie, were now fractured by suspicion and fear. The once unified community was now a patchwork of isolated enclaves, each person guarding their secrets and their fears with the same fervor that had once protected their homes. And as Clara Hayes continued her relentless pursuit of the truth, she knew that the answers she sought could be the key to unlocking the door to a horror far worse than anyone could have imagined. The children's disappearances were not an isolated incident. They were the first sign of a much larger conspiracy, one that could threaten the very fabric of Maplewood and beyond. Clara's team worked tirelessly, piecing together the puzzle that seemed to grow more complex with each passing hour. The path to the truth was fraught with danger, and the cost of uncovering the truth could be dear. As they followed the trail of clues, Clara and her team found themselves navigating through a web of deceit and betrayal, their every step echoing with the echoes of the Watts family's last moments. The town's residents, once neighbors, now became suspects, their actions scrutinized and their secrets laid bare. The once tranquil streets of Maplewood were now a battleground, where the line between friend and foe blurred, and the truth was a prize worth fighting for. In the heart of Maplewood, a single clue emerged, a piece of evidence that could change everything. It was a photograph, a picture of the children with a mysterious woman, her identity a mystery that Clara was determined to solve. The photograph led them to an old, abandoned house on the outskirts of town, a place that had been shrouded in silence for years. As they approached the house, Clara felt a chill run down her spine, a premonition that this was where the answers lay, and where the darkness that had been lurking in the shadows would be exposed to the light. Inside the house, the team found themselves face to face with the woman from the photograph, her eyes wide with fear and her hands trembling as she spoke. She was a woman named Eliza, a woman who claimed to have been a friend of the Watts family, a woman who had seen the darkness that had been growing in their lives. Eliza's story was harrowing, a tale of manipulation and control, of a family that had been trapped in a web of lies and deceit. She spoke of a man who had been a secret lover of Jane Watts, a man who had been the architect of the family's downfall. As Clara and her team delved deeper into Eliza's story, they discovered that the man she spoke of was none other than the town's mayor, a man who had been a pillar of the community, a man who had been the embodiment of Maplewood's values. The revelation was staggering, a bombshell that would shake the very foundation of Maplewood. The mayor, it seemed, had been using his position of power to manipulate the Watts family, driving them to the brink of destruction and ultimately orchestrating their deaths. The discovery of the mayor's involvement was a turning point in the investigation, a revelation that brought Clara and her team one step closer to the truth. But as they pursued the mayor, they realized that they were not just chasing a single man. They were unraveling a much larger conspiracy, one that had been in place for years and that had its tendrils reaching far beyond Maplewood. The mayor's actions were part of a much larger plan, a plan that had been designed to undermine the very fabric of society and to create a world where power and control were the only constants. As Clara and her team pursued the mayor, they found themselves facing a series of increasingly dangerous challenges. The mayor's allies, a group of powerful and ruthless individuals, were determined to protect their leader at all costs, and they were willing to use any means necessary to silence the investigators. The team found themselves in a game of cat and mouse, their every move watched and anticipated by the mayor's enforcers. The investigation took them to the farthest reaches of Maplewood, to places that had been hidden from the public eye for years. They discovered secret societies, clandestine meetings, and a network of corruption that had been in place for decades. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that the Watts family murders were just the tip of the iceberg, a single act in a much larger scheme. The mayor's plan was to use the power and influence of his position to reshape the world in his own image, a world where he was the ultimate authority and where the rule of law was a mere illusion. As the investigation reached its climax, Clara and her team found themselves in a final confrontation with the mayor and his allies. The battle was fierce, a clash of wills and a test of their resolve. The team fought valiantly, their determination fueled by the knowledge that they were not just fighting for the truth, they were fighting for the future of Maplewood and for the safety of its residents. In the end, the mayor was brought to justice, his actions exposed to the light of day. The network of corruption that had been in place for years was dismantled, and the town of Maplewood began to heal from the wounds that had been inflicted upon it. The Watts family murders had been a tragedy, but they had also been a catalyst for change, a moment that had forced the town to confront the darkness that had been lurking in its midst. Clara Hayes and her team had done more than just solve a crime. They had saved a community from falling into the abyss. The town of Maplewood was forever changed by the events that had unfolded, but it was also stronger for it. The residents of Maplewood had learned a hard lesson, one that had taught them that the darkness that could lurk in the hearts of men was real, and that it could not be ignored. The Watts family murders had been a wake-up call, a reminder that the world was not as perfect as it seemed, and that the fight for truth and justice was a fight that must be fought every day. As Clara Hayes stood on the steps of the Maplewood Town Hall, her heart heavy with the weight of the past but filled with hope for the future, she knew that the work they had done was far from over. The battle against corruption and darkness was a never-ending one, and the fight for truth and justice was a fight that would require the dedication and courage of many. But as she looked out over the town that had become her second home, she knew that Maplewood was ready for the challenge, ready to face the darkness and to emerge stronger than ever before. The Watts family murders had cast a long shadow over Maplewood, a once peaceful town where the streets were lined with blooming flowers and laughter echoed from open windows. But now, the once tranquil atmosphere was replaced by an undercurrent of fear and suspicion, as the townsfolk grappled with the sudden and inexplicable disappearance of the Watts children, Emily, Jacob, and Sarah. The children, known for their bright smiles and boundless energy, had vanished without a trace, their disappearance as mysterious as their parents' deaths, which had occurred under equally sinister circumstances. As the investigation deepened, Clara Hayes, a seasoned detective with a knack for uncovering the truth, and her team of seasoned officers delved deeper into the lives of the Watts family, searching for any sign that might have predicted such a tragedy. Clara Hayes, with her piercing blue eyes and sharp intellect, led the investigation with a steely determination. She had seen her fair share of horrors, but the Watts case was unlike any other. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that the Watts' seemingly perfect life was a facade, shrouded in secrets and deception. The once idyllic home, filled with laughter and warmth, was now a labyrinth of lies and manipulation. The family's friends and neighbors, who had once spoken of their perfect family, now whispered about the strange occurrences that had taken place within the Watts household. Clara and her team combed through the evidence, piecing together a puzzle that seemed to grow more complex with each passing day. As they delved further, they discovered that the Watts family had been involved in a web of deceit that extended far beyond their own lives. The parents, it turned out, had been involved in a series of illegal activities, including drug trafficking and money laundering. The children, who had been kept isolated from the outside world, were likely aware of their parents' secrets, but had been too scared to speak up. Clara Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that the children's disappearance was not a random act of violence, but a calculated move designed to silence them forever. The once tranquil town of Maplewood was now a sea of unease, with everyone looking over their shoulders, wondering when the next blow would strike. The Watts family murders were not just a local tragedy. They were a wake-up call to the hidden darkness that could lurk even in the most seemingly idyllic communities. Clara Hayes knew that the answers she sought could be the key to unlocking the door to a horror far worse than anyone could have imagined. She was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As the investigation continued, Clara Hayes and her team discovered that the Watts family had been in contact with a notorious criminal organization known as the Serpents. The organization, known for its ruthless nature and ability to manipulate and control, had been using the Watts family as pawns in their scheme. The children, it seemed, had stumbled upon a dangerous secret that could have exposed the entire operation. The Watts parents, desperate to protect their family and their own lives, had chosen to silence the children, but their actions had only led to their own demise. Clara Hayes, driven by a relentless pursuit of justice, continued her investigation. She tracked down leads, questioned witnesses, and pieced together a chilling narrative that revealed the true extent of the Watts family's involvement with the Serpents. The more she learned, the more she realized that the children's disappearance was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger conspiracy that threatened the entire town of Maplewood. As the investigation reached its climax, Clara Hayes confronted the mastermind behind the Watts family's tragedy. The Serpent's leader, a cold and calculating man known only as the Viper, was revealed to be the architect of the entire scheme. He had used the Watts family as a front, manipulating them into doing his bidding while keeping his own identity hidden. The children's disappearance was a means to eliminate any potential threats to his operation, and the parents' deaths were a necessary sacrifice to maintain his power. In a tense standoff, Clara Hayes and her team managed to apprehend the Viper, bringing him to justice for his crimes. The Watts family's secrets were finally exposed, and the town of Maplewood could begin to heal from the trauma. But the true cost of the investigation was immense. Clara Hayes had uncovered a horror that went far beyond the Watts family, revealing a network of corruption and deceit that had been hidden in plain sight for years. The Watts family murders had left an indelible mark on Maplewood, but the town's residents were determined to move forward. They had learned a hard lesson about the hidden darkness that could exist even in the most unsuspecting places. Clara Hayes, though exhausted and emotionally drained, felt a sense of closure knowing that she had brought justice to the Watts family and exposed the evil that had been lurking in the shadows. The story of the Watts family would be remembered as a tragedy, but also as a triumph of the human spirit, a testament to the resilience of a community that refused to be defeated by darkness. The Watts family murders had cast a long shadow over Maplewood, a once picture-perfect town, where the streets were lined with blooming flowers and laughter echoed through the air. Now, the town was a living nightmare, each creak of a floorboard and the flicker of a streetlight sending shivers down the spines of its residents. Clara Hayes, a seasoned detective with a reputation for unearthing the truth, had been brought in to unravel the mystery that had left the community in shock. As she stood in the Watts' modest home, the air thick with the scent of decay, Clara's eyes scanned the room, searching for any clue that might have been overlooked. The children, Emily, Jacob, and Sarah, were the first to vanish, their toys scattered haphazardly across the floor like the remnants of a chaotic game. The parents, Mark and Linda Watts, had been found dead in their home, their bodies showing signs of a brutal struggle. Clara's team had combed through the house, examining every inch of the place, but the trail had gone cold. The children's disappearance was particularly perplexing. There were no signs of a struggle, no ransom notes, nothing to indicate that they had been taken against their will. Clara Hayes had spent countless hours reviewing the Watts' lives, piecing together the puzzle that seemed to have no solution. She had interviewed neighbors, friends, and coworkers, all of whom had nothing but glowing things to say about the Watts family. Mark was a beloved teacher, Linda a caring nurse, and their children were the epitome of innocence. Yet, as Clara delved deeper, she discovered that the Watts' perfect facade was a carefully constructed illusion. Mark had been involved in a secret gambling ring, and Linda had been having an affair with a man from the town's elite. The children, unaware of their parents' secrets, had grown up in a house of lies. The more Clara learned, the more she realized that the Watts family murders were not just a local tragedy. They were a wake-up call to the hidden darkness that could lurk even in the most seemingly idyllic communities. The town of Maplewood was a microcosm of the world, where the surface appearance could be deceiving. As she continued her investigation, Clara Hayes knew that the answers she sought could be the key to unlocking the door to a horror far worse than anyone could have imagined. The town was on edge, with rumors swirling like wildfire. Some believed that the Watts family had been targeted by a serial killer, while others thought that the children had been taken by a cult or a radical group. Clara Hayes dismissed these theories as she focused on the evidence that was stacking up against the Watts family. She had discovered that Mark and Linda had been planning a trip to a secluded cabin in the mountains, a place they had visited frequently without their children. The cabin had been their secret hideaway, a place where they could escape the pressures of their lives and indulge in their vices. As Clara Hayes and her team traveled to the cabin, they found it in disarray, the furniture overturned and personal items strewn about. The scent of smoke lingered in the air, suggesting that a fire had recently been extinguished. Inside, they discovered a hidden room, its door sealed shut. With trembling hands, Clara Hayes broke the seal and stepped into the darkness. The room was filled with old photographs, letters, and other personal items, all of which had been hidden away from the eyes of the outside world. As Clara Hayes examined the items, she found a series of letters between Mark and Linda, detailing their plans to escape their lives and start anew. The letters revealed a dark secret that had been hidden for years. Mark and Linda had been members of a secret society that practiced dark rituals and sacrifices. The children, it seemed, had stumbled upon the truth and were about to become collateral damage in their parents' twisted plans. Clara Hayes' heart raced as she realized that the Watts family murders were not the result of a random act of violence, but a premeditated attempt to cover up their dark past. The revelation sent shockwaves through Maplewood as the townspeople learned the truth about the Watts family. Clara Hayes knew that the investigation was far from over. She had to find the children and bring their parents to justice. With the help of her team, she began to piece together the final pieces of the puzzle. They discovered that the children had been taken to a remote location, far from Maplewood, where they were being held captive by a member of the secret society. As Clara Hayes led her team to the location, they were greeted by a fierce battle. The member of the secret society, a man with a twisted sense of loyalty, fought with all his might to protect the children. But Clara Hayes was relentless, her determination to save the children driving her forward. In a climactic showdown, she managed to overpower the man, freeing the children and bringing him into custody. The Watts family murders had been a dark chapter in Maplewood's history, but Clara Hayes' unwavering commitment to justice had brought light to the darkness. The children were returned to their family, who were grateful for the detectives' efforts. The town of Maplewood, though forever changed, began to heal, its residents coming together to support one another through the trauma. Clara Hayes, with her reputation intact, moved on to her next case, knowing that the hidden darkness she had uncovered was just the tip of the iceberg. The world was full of secrets, and she was determined to uncover them all. The Watts family murders had cast a long shadow over Maplewood, a once serene town where the scent of blooming gardens and the laughter of children filled the air. Now the streets were silent, the once vibrant community shrouded in an eerie stillness that seemed to whisper secrets of its own. Clara Hayes, a seasoned detective with a reputation for her unwavering dedication to the truth, stood in the Watts' modest home, her eyes scanning the room for any clue that might have slipped past the initial chaos. The children, Emily, Jacob, and Sarah, had vanished without a trace, their disappearance as mysterious as their parents' deaths, which had occurred under equally suspicious circumstances. The family had been the epitome of normalcy. There lives a tapestry of suburban dreams and unspoken fears. But as Clara and her team delved deeper into the lives of the Watts, they began to unravel a web of secrets and deception that threatened to consume the entire town. The children's last known whereabouts had been a local park, a place of innocence and joy that now felt like a trap. Clara's team had combed through security footage, interviewing friends and neighbors, and yet the trail had gone cold. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that the Watts' seemingly perfect life was a facade, shrouded in secrets and deception. The parents had worked tirelessly to maintain the illusion of happiness, but beneath the surface, their marriage was crumbling, and their children were caught in the crossfire. Clara found herself questioning everything she knew about the Watts, from their seemingly amicable relationship with their neighbors to the mysterious phone calls that had gone unanswered. As the investigation deepened, Clara Hayes and her team began to connect the dots, piecing together a picture of a family torn apart by internal strife. The children's disappearance was no longer just a missing persons case. It had become a puzzle with pieces scattered across the map of Maplewood. The once tranquil town was now a sea of unease, with everyone looking over their shoulders, wondering when the next blow would strike. The Watts family murders were not just a local tragedy. They were a wake-up call to the hidden darkness that could lurk even in the most seemingly idyllic communities. Clara Hayes knew that the answers she sought could be the key to unlocking the door to a horror far worse than anyone could have imagined. She had seen the same look in the eyes of countless families before, the look of fear and disbelief that comes with the realization that the monsters they feared most were not outside their doors but within them. As she continued her relentless pursuit of the truth, Clara was determined to uncover the truth behind the Watts' mysterious disappearance. She knew that the path she was on was fraught with danger, but she was driven by a singular purpose: to bring justice to the Watts family and to protect the innocent from the darkness that had taken hold of Maplewood. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation grew increasingly complex. Clara Hayes and her team had to navigate a web of lies and deceit, all while dealing with the emotional toll of the case. The townspeople of Maplewood watched in a mix of horror and fascination as the investigation unfolded, their lives forever changed by the events that had transpired. The Watts family had been a part of the community for years, and their absence left a void that seemed impossible to fill. One evening, as Clara Hayes sat in her office, reviewing the latest evidence, she received a call that would change everything. It was a tip from an anonymous source, a voice that seemed to come from the shadows of Maplewood. The caller had information about the Watts family that could potentially lead to the children's whereabouts. Clara's heart raced as she listened to the voice, its words a mix of urgency and fear. The caller had seen something that could change the course of the investigation. Armed with the new information, Clara Hayes and her team set out on a mission that would take them into the heart of Maplewood's darkest secrets. They followed leads that took them from the dilapidated homes of the town's forgotten corners to the wealthy enclaves where the elite lived in seclusion. Each lead brought them closer to the truth, but it was a trail that seemed to lead nowhere, a maze of dead ends and false hopes. Then, one night, as the town of Maplewood slumbered, Clara Hayes received another call. This time, the caller was someone she had spoken to earlier in the investigation, a neighbor who had seemed to know more than he was letting on. The neighbor had seen something that he couldn't shake off. He had seen the children, Emily, Jacob, and Sarah, alive and trapped in a hidden room within the Watts home. With this new lead, Clara Hayes and her team moved with the urgency of a storm, their hearts pounding as they made their way to the Watts home. The night was dark, the streets silent, but the team's resolve was unbreakable. They knew that the children's lives hung in the balance, and they were determined to save them. As they approached the house, Clara Hayes felt a chill run down her spine. The air was thick with tension, and the weight of the unknown pressed down on her shoulders. The team moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched for any sign of the children. Inside, the house was a scene of chaos, with furniture overturned and walls marked with strange symbols. Clara Hayes' eyes widened as she recognized the symbols, ancient runes that she had seen in texts about forbidden rituals. The Watts family had been involved in something dark and sinister, something that had led to their downfall and the disappearance of their children. The team continued their search, their voices hushed as they moved through the house. Finally, they found the door, hidden behind a false wall in the master bedroom. Clara Hayes took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest, and pushed the door open. The room beyond was small, with no windows, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. The children were there, bound and gagged, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. As Clara Hayes and her team freed the children, they were greeted with tears and sobs, the relief of being found overwhelming. The children had been held captive for weeks, their parents' involvement in the dark rituals that had taken place in their home, leaving them trapped and alone. The Watts family's story was one of horror and tragedy, a tale that had shocked the entire town of Maplewood. Clara Hayes and her team had uncovered a truth that had been hidden in plain sight, a truth that revealed the depths of human darkness and the monsters that could lurk even in the most unsuspecting places. As the investigation came to a close, the town of Maplewood began to heal, but the scars left behind would never fully fade. Clara Hayes stood in the Watts home, looking around at the evidence of the darkness that had been lurking in the shadows. She knew that the Watts family's story was one that would be told for generations, a cautionary tale of the hidden darkness that could exist even in the most seemingly perfect of lives. With the children safely returned to their family and the truth finally uncovered, Clara Hayes and her team had brought closure to the Watts family. But as she stood in the Watts home, looking out the window at the town that had been forever changed, she couldn't help but wonder what other hidden truths remained hidden in the depths of Maplewood's dark corners. The fight against the darkness was far from over, and Clara Hayes was determined to continue her quest for the truth, no matter where it led her.